All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see, or at least see the outlines of so many of you here this afternoon. Thanks for joining us as we talk about non-degree credentials, and specifically about both the challenges and opportunities of thinking about getting to better outcomes data for these non-degree credentials. Feels like a particularly good moment for us to be having this conversation. I'm sure many of you saw the update that Lumina had to the Goal 2040 released on Monday, which really reaffirmed both the value of traditional degrees, but also credentials of value, and specifically adding a look to good outcomes data as a way to assess whether or not that sort of real credentials of value is something that could go into the attainment goal. And that really feels like it builds on a lot of good conversations that states and other folks have been having, and in many ways led by the state of Texas and House Bill 8 from a couple of years ago, which called out and sort of tied funding for credentials of value to certain degrees of outcomes. So more to come on that, but we're excited to have the conversation, excited that both Steve and David are able to join me this afternoon. The two of them bring a wealth of experience and perspective across higher ed, state, learner, training provider perspective, and the employer perspective. So I think we'll have a really good conversation. We'll go ahead and kick off with some introductions. Let's see. I'll get the correct clicker here. There we go. So first to introduce myself, my name is Stacy Caldwell. I am the CEO of CredLens. CredLens is a relatively new nonprofit formed by Strada Corporation in sort of early part of last year. We are really focused on addressing the outcomes gap for non-degree credentials and building out a national data trust that's really focused on that. I also bring to this conversation a long history in education technology. I spent a bunch of years building out training programs really focused on sort of quick attainment of skills, everything from K-8 to workforce development, and then also spent some time in measurement. So I was excited to bring those two things to the work at CredLens and also to this conversation. Steve, why don't I hand to you?
Great, thanks, Stacy. Honored to be here. Thank you all. I'm Steve Lee. I'm the CEO of the Skill Up Coalition, which is a career navigation platform specifically targeting STARS, skills through alternative routes, those without a college degree. Based here in New York City, I'm a huge New York sports fan, for what that's worth, which is nothing, right? I'm just really honored to be here, so thank you all.
Thanks, Steve.
Great. I'm David Troutman. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Higher Education in Texas at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I did notice my email address is wrong, so I'll shoot you a new email address. That's my old job. That's okay. No worries, no worries. I've been leading and championing and creating the credential value methodology that we use with House Bill 8. We'll talk about that in a second. But I also lead several divisions across the state of Texas when it comes to college and career advising, when it comes to student success, and data collection. And so we have to make sure that we're collecting more and more data so that we can have that transparency to understand the benefits of higher education.
Perfect, thank you. So we thought we would start by just framing up the ecosystem in the space just a little bit. Many of this will probably be familiar to you all, but wanted to have sort of some of the same base of understanding. So when we talk about non-degree credentials, what are we really talking about? These are the workforce credentials, certificates, certifications that folks can use to get a job. And so we at CredLens are taking a pretty wide definition here. So the sort of common definition around certificates that could be issued by 2-year or 4-year colleges, could be issued by training providers, certifications that are often issued by third-party organizations and involve an assessment. So these would be the CompTIA certifications, but could also be many of like medical coding and billing has really clear certification programs. Licenses, badges, micro-credentials. Over time, we think we're going to want to be able to get outcomes data for all of those, but certainly the sort of focus right now and the initial focus is really on those certificates and certification programs. When you take that view of the world and say, hey, anything that sits outside of a 2-year or 4-year degree that you can use to get a job, the world is very big. So our best estimates that are over 50 million Americans would say, yes, I have some sort of non-degree credential. And the universe of who offer those and how many of those there are. So 17,000 issuers and getting close to 1 million unique non-degree credentials actually on offer. So really big system. And growing pretty rapidly. So we estimate that enrollment growth and attainment of non-degree credentials is growing at about 10% a year, which is 3 to 4 times the rate that folks are getting at least a 4-year degree. So big, growing. But getting any sort of data for these non-degree credentials is really hard. So I just listed out a whole bunch of folks that issue with these. So you've got state agencies issuing licenses. You've got certification bodies issuing certifications. You've got certificate programs coming from both the for-credit and the non-credit side of community colleges, coming from training providers and some other third-party providers. So frankly, there's a patchwork of issuers. And it's really hard just to get to the point where there is a count of these credentials. So I just said we estimate over 50 million. All of the best estimates on a count of how many of these credentials folks actually hold right now comes from survey data and then folks using the survey data to estimate. There is no good count anywhere. So difficult just to count. The data is siloed into a bunch of different places. And then when you get to the bigger question of, hey, do we have good outcomes data, that is also particularly hard to understand and hard to get a handle on. The reason it's hard to get a handle on is unlike what we have in the 2-year and 4-year system, where you have sort of public universities being linked to public administrative data. So that would be the college scorecard more broadly, but also a bunch of states have started to link back to their UI wage data systems. For folks that sit outside of that sort of sphere, there is no easy place to go. And so what you see is, credential issuer by credential issuer, what they're doing is saying, okay, we'll go do a survey. That's slow, it's unreliable. You have to be really good at survey data and really good at assessing that survey data to get good, accurate results. To go further than that and do a full research study is very expensive. And then if you sit at a state or a funder level and you're sort of looking across, basically the difficulty of that just gets compounded because you're looking at all these different sort of systems that folks are using and trying to gain a collective whole around it. So we basically sit at this point with a sort of real dearth of data, which is providing some challenges and that these two are going to talk about how they're starting to address. Obviously, the downside of that is without good data, pick your perspective here, there's going to be a challenge that comes up. If you're an individual credential issuer, you really want to understand the outcome so you can look across your portfolio, you can improve the ones that need to be improved, and you can, frankly, sort of feed back information to funders and potential folks who want to take your programs, and the same is true across the board. So with that, I'm going to turn to my friends here to help tell a little bit of this story. So Steve, why don't I go to you first and take a little bit of the learner and talent developer perspective.
Awesome, thanks. As I mentioned earlier, SkillUp is a direct-to-consumer platform, right? And if you talk to worker learners, they don't give a darn about these fancy words like credentials, and they don't care. They only care about 3 things: time, money, and quality. That's it. I don't have a lot of time, I don't got a lot of money, and I care about quality. And so for SkillUp as a platform, we can work our way around the first 2 things, right? We can use technology to figure out short-term low costs, right? The thing where we struggle and the universe struggles is quality. So how does a worker learner know that something is high quality? And I think that's a missing facet. It's a missing facet for SkillUp. Because how do we know what to offer folks if we don't know if it's high quality? Because that data is lacking. And so that is why what CredLens is doing is so important. Because for the worker learner, the 70 million stars across the country without a college degree, that is what they need to make the right informed decision. It's not what they have. They have a bunch of survey data. That's what we have. It's not good enough. And then from a talent developer perspective, same thing. Time, money, quality. That's all they really care about. If you boil it down to its nub, they can work around the first 2, right? But even the really good ones, don't know how good their programs are because they don't have the data. They have self-reported data, which is fine for now, but it ain't good enough, right, for the people that they want to help. And that's why the work that these guys are doing is so important. Because again, it's all about time, money, quality, And the first two you can work around. You can't work around the other one, right? That's why CredLens is so important. So super important, particularly for the worker learner. Like seriously, like without them, then what the hell are we doing? Like honestly. So, so thank you CredLens for taking on this very important effort.
Yep. Thanks, Steve. And apologies for the lack of quality control on this slide. Clearly editing the hour before the presentation. Not good. Time value, quality. Quality is the third one.
The power of repetition. The power
Yeah.
of repetition. Yes. And so from a learner's perspective also, I think elected officials, presidents and chancellors are also really wanting information around the ROI. And so when we proposed the Credentials of Value for House Bill 8, we really wanted to shake the tree in a sense of understanding how much are students investing in their educational experience. Before, we always talked about net tuition and fees. Well, people still have to pay their rent, they have to pay for food, and that's calculated in the cost of attendance. So what we've done is we've followed students longitudinally, and we're pretty fortunate in Texas that we've, several decades ago, they decided to create this data infrastructure that has this rich, robust data. And so we also have an amazing relationship with two other agencies. So we're the post-secondary education agency, TEA, so K through 12, and the Texas Workforce Commission, so the workforce. We have a tri-agency collaboration. And so we're able to share data much easier than we were in the past. Typically, if I requested data from one of the other agencies, it would take 6 to 8 months because it would have to go through this process. Now that we've created this tri-agency agreement endorsed by the governor, it takes 2 weeks. So it's much faster. And so what we can do there is now we can link all these data together to truly tell the true story of what's happening with traditional credit. I'll get to non-traditional in a second. But with the way we've always been providing education, we can really understand the opportunity cost, so the foregone wages that exist. What are you missing out if you would have just gone straight from high school to the workforce? And then we can really look at their earnings outcomes cumulatively over time and really understand at what year did they break even. And so that's our goal in Texas, is to make sure that we're producing 550,000 credentials of value per year by 2030. Right now we're at 6. We're at 3. I wish we were at 6. We're at 367,000. So we're pretty far away from the 5-year goal. But I think we can get there by creating alternative pathways so that individuals can see themselves as receiving, I would say, a quick win. Creating this experience that they could see a boost in their value and their earnings premium. And we'll talk about the challenges with that in a second. But I think it's important for us to hone in and collaborate with one another to share these data freely and be very thoughtful about privacy, so we're not overstepping boundaries, but we can start telling and informing students at a very early age. So we're trying at the agency to work with TEA to get this information into middle school counselors and stop thinking, oh, I'm just going to tell a senior in high school. That's way too late. And so just creating this level of transparency that we've never had before.
That's great. Thank you. So you've heard the challenges, you've heard some of the really good work going on at Texas, you heard what Steve is trying to do as he works with folks. Wanted to just take a moment. So CredLens was formed because Strada basically in their strategy work in 2023 took a look at that challenge and said, basically what we need is a new national data trust here, and we need to get to a point where we have better verified data on this subset of non-degree credentials that we could look at nationally, but that we can also use to inform and sort of support state work that's going on, but also eventually, hopefully get to the point where we're supporting work directly with employers and individuals. So what is CredLens? We are a nonprofit national data trust. Our goal is to create clear and transparent outcomes data and and therefore create over time a rich new resource for quality research. The way that we're approaching that is we are building out a centralized platform for NDC data and insights, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works in just a moment. And just to give a sense, the way that we're doing this and the reason that it was important for somebody like Strada to fund the work is, we took a look at this and said, if we're going to build a national data trust, you have to build a really rich, robust back end from the very beginning. You have to build the modern data architecture and build the security procedures around this and do that in a really robust way so that you actually get the trust of credential issuers to share data with you, match that to outcomes data, get a benefit, but also trust you over time so that we can build out the data set. So big investment up front, a little bit of a sort of create the utility so that we can pull the data in a way that folks can use it more broadly. The way that we're approaching this is sort of right now, what we are doing is we're going out to individual credential issuers. So these could be training providers, it could be certification bodies, it could be some community colleges who are offering specific certificate programs. And we are getting a verified list of their cohorts of folks. Who actually got the credential at what time? Who has a certification? When did they get it? Is it still valid? And then we're taking that and matching that to a whole series of outcomes data. So these are public data sources as well as private data sources. And we are then sort of matching those in an anonymized way, putting them through, as we like to say, the beautiful laptop in the middle, the Credential Insights platform, and then delivering back first to the credential issuer, outcome insights. So we're able to then show the credential issuer what happened with earnings. What were folks making before they earned your credential? What were they making right at the time they gained it? And then what happened 1 year, 3 year, 5 years later? What was their path? Same question around employment. So did they get a job in the field that you just trained them to get a job in? And was that a sort of, hey, they moved one time and they stayed static, or was it something that put them on a nice new employment trajectory? And then the same question around education. How do these different credentials start to stack together or build a portfolio? And where do certain credential, sort of weaving two together lead to outcomes that either lead to folks accelerating their path to a 4-year degree or lead to some other outcomes. So those are the sorts of things that we're trying to, that we're in the midst of doing. And just to give a brief sense, did a bunch of building in 24, went live with the first version of the platform in December, and so we are right now in the midst of adding additional data outcome sources as well as a full range of credential issuers. So that's sort of the path that we're in right now. And then I'll sit on this one for a while because I'd like to now hand back to these two. But with that setup and what we're trying to do, the first goal is, hey, go out to the credential issuers, get them some really good data. The point there would be, I have yet to meet a training provider that doesn't say, oh my gosh, give me more data about my program and I can use that to go do improvements, right? So if you have a portfolio of programs, you want to know which ones are getting great results, which ones are getting less good results. That might be the place you need to go talk to employers, or you need to understand if there's something that you need to address in what your program is doing. So that's the starting point, but then you can, and then as credential issuers get that and say, yes, I'm willing to share my data more broadly, you can start to see the benefits across the board. So why don't I hand back to you? I mean, you think a lot about sort of how students could benefit from this, but also, sort of how you're trying to guide people. So what do you see longer term as sort of the ways that you want to start incorporating the data?
Yeah, I'll share. I should probably do things. So sometimes I joke around like SkillUp actually doesn't do anything. Like we don't want to program, we don't want to. We're a digital aggregator, right? And we point people into programs that actually do stuff. The challenge for us is I don't know what happens to people when they go, right? I have no data on the back end. And so when funders ask, or part of how many jobs does SkillUp create, it's very hard for me to get that answer except through survey data, which is what pretty much all of us use, right? So to be able to get this actually solves not just problems for training programs, but for groups like us and many others who are digital aggregators, then we can get a sense that we're actually adding value into the ecosystem. That's really, really important, right, for us. The second thing, I'll share a personal story. I have a friend who works at Expedia. And I asked him, like, well, we're doing this thing with CredLens. What do you think? He's like, what took you so long, right? Because sometimes the most obvious things are the hardest to do because he plays in the world where they've been doing this for 20 plus years. right? And the reason they're able to do it is because underlying all the travel navigation is a tech stack called Sabre, which allows for the privacy, security, interoperability to operate. So when Kayak or Expedia sends people to Hilton Hotel, they know that someone got a room and they get paid for it. And they've been doing this for 25 years. So what took so long? In fact, he said that workforce is like the only space that doesn't have it. Like literally the only space. Every other industry has it except workforce. Education system has it. All the industries have it. Travel has it. Banks have it. They all have it except this space. So why not? So I just gave him like some excuses. It's hard. Admin data is hard. IRS data, all that kind of nonsense, right? That's just a bunch of excuses. At least I think. These guys are trying to solve for the excuses that I give to people why we don't have it. And it's really hard, but at least someone's doing it. And it's going to solve a lot of problems. So that's what I think about it. Systems change for us, and then for Skill Up, maybe I can say we got someone a job for real, like for real.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited about it because so in Texas we have over 85 two-year and four-year public institutions. The enrollment's around 1.6 million students each year in the public sector. And so as part of House Bill 8, we can fund third-party credentials, non-credit, and that keeps me up at night. I mean, I call it this part of my gray of my hair because it's just so daunting. It's like you're trying to boil the ocean. And so I'm going to leverage this to my benefit so that I don't have to create 80 MOUs with entities creating third-party credentials. And I think it's going to be exciting to help ensure that it's trusted data. I saw that on the slide, and I think we have to emphasize that. Validated data. Because what I try to do is I try to protect students from those who are trying to potentially take advantage of them. I don't have the authority to do that, but I can use data to really understand what's happening. And I want to make sure that we're protecting students so that if we get them excited about an experience, I want to make sure that experience is actually going to have an impact on their lives and not just be some additional line on their resume. So I'm really excited about this opportunity.
Thank you, and I'm going to go back to you with one other sort of like let's make it real example here, David. So you work at the policy level, you work at the higher ed level to try to say, okay, let's make sure that we're actually gathering the right data around these. Yeah. But there's also a really simple case of, you've got a bunch of these community colleges who offer training programs that then lead to third-party certification.
That's right.
But you're actually wanting to tie those together, and that is, I will tell you, across many different states, very, very difficult to do. In many cases, folks deliver a program, they're supposed to go, they prepared the students to go off and do a certification. They don't yet have that data. So could you speak a little bit to that challenge and how sort of tying that together and how you're thinking about that sort of changing the way you're thinking about some of your programs?
Yeah, we had to come up with a new term for the funding model called ICLC. It's basically an institutional effort that leads to a certification or a license. What we found as part of this powerful legislation that was passed, we've opened Pandora's box, a good box, not the things rushing out at you, but there are things that we were collecting over the years that were traditional ways of collection. And we've really been able to revamp and try to highlight the great work that's happening at the two-year campuses. And that's allowing us to uncover these experiences where students will go and take a series of courses. It might be 80 hours of contact hours. And they have enough information to receive a licensure. So CDL is a pretty basic, but it's a very most frequently. So there was no badge, there was no credential received because the student left and they got the job and they moved on. So that's giving us the opportunity, but it's going to help, working with Credlens, it'll help us triangulate the data to truly understand what's happening and how that also leads something to momentum points in students' lives. I get really excited about the opportunity. Not all students can afford they don't have the luxury to go to a 4-year experience. They don't have the luxury to go to a 2-year experience at their current space and time and based on their family situations. How can we create these sort of quick wins that create momentum points, that create stackability, and to see them go forward? You know, I reflect on my academic career. I started at a 2-year, I stopped out for a year, I paid as I went, then I transferred to a 4-year. It took me 7 years to graduate with a bachelor's degree, but then the chain caught. Yeah. And then I got a master's and PhD in 5 years. But what I'm trying to say is, like, we have to identify where the student's at, meet them where they're at, and try to create an experience for them so they can see themselves receiving that educational experience that will drive them to having agency, having the ability to say, you know, thank you so much for the job offer of $30K, but, you know, based on what I know from the data, I need 38 or 40. Mm-hmm. And so it can create that experience of negotiation so that people can have that more line of sight of what's happening.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's a great example. So we are going to just to let you all know, we'll try to leave about 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So if folks have questions, we'll ask you to come to the mics, and we'll leave the last 15 minutes. But wanted to spend the next sort of 15, 20 minutes, you know, digging into a few of the sort of bigger discussion topics. And so, you know, we thought we'd start with one that was like momentum risk. So, you know, there is a lot of conversation around skills-based hiring. There's a lot of conversation around non-degree credentials. And I have already started to hear some folks talk about a little bit of the backlash from skills-based hiring, like, oh, like that just means people are taking away a 4-year degree, but we don't really know what it is. But I've also heard a lot of people saying, like, okay, great, like let's push towards more and more and more of these programs. And so one of the topics that we were talking about is, how do you just make sure that non-degree credentials don't become the next MOOC, where like the sort of momentum gets ahead of the quality programming? So I don't know, either one of you want to weigh in on that?
How do we prevent it? I mean, I think it goes back to the data mm-hmm. and understanding the ROI associated with what's happening, mm-hmm. understanding whether it be contact hours, understanding the badging, understanding, because I've seen and I've heard from campuses that are being creative with non-credit and creating badging. Mm-hmm. So for example, there's a campus, I won't name the name, but that provides a badge for presentation skills, or I need some meaty information to connect to the ROI that has changed the lives of students versus let's create this open education resource, which I'm full support of, mm-hmm. to create a lecture base that you can go to and we don't follow up to see who actually completed that type of credential experience. So we just need, for me, it's about assessment mm-hmm. and truly assessing the situation and not getting ahead of our skis, because then we'll fall.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on MOOCs, but I will echo the skiing ahead of their skis. I think that's what happens, right? I also think the incentive structures weren't aligned, right? Like, some of these are like for-profit folks, right? So the incentives don't align. They want to scale and make profit and all that kind of jazz without thinking about the quality of data, the quality of student, all that kind of stuff. They just want to scale. And I get it. But when that happens, you lose out on what's really important, right? Which is serving, right? Serving at the expense of scale. Mm-hmm. And, right, they were getting ahead of their skis. And so that's why right now no one talks about MOOCs anymore.
I think also, just to add, I think ensuring we have intentionality with what we're offering, mm-hmm. We have to make sure it's aligning with workforce needs. Mm-hmm. I'm all for ideating mm-hmm. and creating up new ideas, but if it's not going to relate to the workforce needs within the state, within a region, within the metropolitan area, mm-hmm. it could be all for naught.
Yep. Yeah, and I think both of you are also hitting on something that I think is really interesting, which is getting to the actual skill attainment, or getting to something that's sort of real enough and substantive enough that you can say, yes, this thing was actually achieved. You know, like, we talked about it as MOOCs. I fear this one a little bit on the AI front, as folks are like, oh, we can just use AI to scrape a bunch of stuff and say, oh, like, we know you have these skills. I think we have to go one level deeper and make sure that we're sort of putting some verification around that and getting to the point that we have, sort of some metrics that get at real skill attainment, and then, and then we've got to translate back to then how do we get outcomes data around that. I think this will be an ongoing challenge. I think that we are starting with certificate programs and certification programs because those are reasonably well-defined buckets of skills that I think have enough heft that you can go out and look and get real outcomes data. The goal here would be to get all the way down to the skills, but I think there's, we all define those in different ways. There's different different standards and terminology that folks are using, and then as the more granular you get, the harder it is to actually isolate out and say, here are the results. So I think lots and lots of really good and interesting research, and I think we should all continue to push that way, but I think that sort of making sure that we're being thoughtful about the actual skill attainment and sort of what that represents, I think is, I heard that as the undertone of what both of you were saying, so wanted to call it out.
Yeah, and I think also being thoughtful with what outcomes we're looking at. Because wages are not normally distributed.
Yeah.
There's systematic bias in wage. And we have to make sure we recognize that to understand who our audience is that's receiving that type of experience and how that translates into the workforce opportunities or the lack thereof. And how that, at bare minimum, we have to start creating conversations around living wage. We jumped the gun in higher education where we started talking about mobility, economic mobility. Can they move from the lowest quintile to the upper quintile? Yep. Well, I think most people are just worried about paying their bills and having security. So we have to really be thoughtful about what outcomes we're looking at. And that's why I'm excited about Credlens and where you're going with the types of variation of data that exists, because what I have access to is our unemployment insurance wage records, right? That only tells part of the story. We need to understand the full story. In my dream of all dreams, it would be the opportunity to also have earnings, but also who actually receives health benefits, who has a 401k, how much are in your savings so that if you do have a hiccup, which we all experience in our life, can you withstand that hiccup? So there's opportunities to be had.
Absolutely, absolutely. Why don't we flip to the next one, which is the employer role. I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about, and we're increasingly having conversations with employers to try to make sure that we're thinking about their role in this. And I am sort of personally, and I think we at Credlens are starting to be big believers that the continuing path towards NDCs being valuable, sort of the obvious path towards skills-based hiring continuing having a role, is employers continuing to evolve and sort of think about, hey, how do we build skills into our definitions of jobs, our definitions of how we do our internal professional development, such that we can then sort of go back and hire out of those. So I'm just sort of curious both of you have these conversations all the time and are sort of pushing on folks and getting perspectives. What is the employer role, and how do we make sure that the value of these credentials flow all the way through such that there's the actual endpoint where students are able to get jobs, employers are able to say, yes, this is the value, and get a little bit out of, what we're currently hearing, which is people are like, they're important, but I'm not entirely sure what's in them right now, and so I'd like to understand that a little bit more fully.
Okay. You want to start, Dave, and I'll go?
Sure. I think on the employer side, we've been really analyzing job posting data to understand what employers needs. And the most frequent, skill required is communication skills.
Yep.
And, but I think we have to operationalize that in a deeper level. Because I view skills similar to a fingerprint. It can be very unique in a situation. And so how can we create duplications of fingerprints to understand what's the best path forward for both the employee and the employer. So I always talk about, in higher education, we talk about time to degree. Well, in from an employer side, it's time to productivity. Like, how long is it going to take me to train someone so they can end up making money for me at the end of the day? And I think we have to think through what that time to productivity and what skills are needed to get them where they need to be. And then, and that's the foot in the door technique. And then my argument would be is to follow them longitudinally to see over time what other types of experiences that take place, because lifelong learning is a real thing. And we're seeing that in our data, where constantly students are coming back into the system. And I just took a Coursera course a few months ago. So you're constantly learning. And how do we build that so it can create this evolution so that employers are satisfied and also employees are satisfied?
Yeah, that's great.
You go to these conferences, right? And we have a lot of advocates, right? And people like to poo-poo employers. Like, I like to poo-poo employers. Right? But if you ask an employer, how do they know that someone is good? Like, seriously, how do you know? You don't know. They don't know. Skills, but how do we know skills-based hiring is good? Like, they have no idea. And so I think they would want an idea, right? So which is why, David mentioned verified credentials, there's a learning employment record stuff. I think that stuff's really, really, really important because it creates some validation. And what CredLens is going to do is they're going to validate the validation. If that makes any sense, right? So they're going to be able to validate the effectiveness of these credentials in a way that will show employers this is actually for real. This is no like skills-based hiring nonsense, right? This is like real stuff, real quality. You can hire off this. Otherwise, why would they ever hire skills-based hiring? Like, seriously, why would they ever do it? They don't, and we're just going to keep on poo-pooing, and they're going to keep on poo-pooing back. But now if you have the validation of validation, maybe they won't poo-poo back, maybe.
I'm curious, when you've worked with folks and gotten in sort of pushed directly with an employer, what arguments with them are particularly, like, what sells them? What gets them, who are the sorts of folks and what are the arguments that get them to say, yeah, I'm with you?
Very, very few, because usually they say no. I think the argument that gets them the most, which SkillUp doesn't have, which is what other groups are working on, is this idea of like a really quality verified credential, right? This is the LER movement. Like, I think that would sell. And then the validation of the LER would sell. Because again, why would they ever hire someone if they don't know if they're good or not? Just because advocates say they're good? Just because we have 70 million stars and 30 million can get a job? Really? No, right? At least I don't think. So the SkillUp argument never sells, like never. But maybe like the validation of the validation could sell. And I think it would actually.
Yeah, no, that's a interesting point. Thank you. All right, so let's turn to talking about incentives. So my friend Steve here likes to talk about getting incentives right, and do we have the incentives right to make the system actually work as a whole? So one of the things that we talk about is this is a push towards more transparent data. CredLens, quite frankly, at the start is going out to credential issuers and being very clear that as part of a national data trust, you get control of your data. So if you tell us who has a credential, we're going to share back some useful data with you about the outcomes of those folks. And then you own that data. You get to keep control of it. Nobody else gets to look at it unless you say yes to it. Now, we think over time, when David says, hey, if you want XYZ funding or you want to participate in this, like, please share your data back with us, that people are going to raise their hand and say, yes, we're willing to share. Or over time, when folks are looking at their data and saying, oh, we meet like these 5 different models of quality, that people will want to share that. So we think there's some sort of paths through that. But this question of like more globally getting some incentives that move towards transparent data, frankly, in the absence of what we've had in higher ed, which is the Title IV mandate. The federal government said you have to share this if you want Title IV funding. So in a world where you don't have that mandate, what are the sorts of incentives that really help to support and move us towards transparent data? You want to start since you're
I'll start because I feel like of all the things that are challenges to what CredLens is going to do, this is the biggest one. Like I always think of like my dad when I was young always taught me about like the WIFM, like what's in it for me? WIFM, what's in it for me, right? And he always says the things that always hurt are like inertia, incentives, all that kind of, which is true. Because people don't like to do stuff, right? They have their own incentive structures. And these guys are going to mess up their incentive structure, maybe. Which means that transparent data means maybe this is not going to be good data, right? How do I fundraise off bad data? Am I going to take that risk? I'm doing fine now. That is really, really hard to change, like really hard. And I feel like that's the biggest challenge, is to convince at scale, accreditation agencies to play ball when they don't have to play ball. Maybe, maybe. Why do they have to play ball? Just because CredLens says so? No, they're doing okay. I think that's a real challenge. And I think Stacy has it right. I think ultimately that data play will play, but I don't know. I think it's a real challenge.
Well, I think it's going to benefit because if I have accurate and validated data, I can promote that data out on our websites to show that yes, we are providing transparency that these types of experiences are having a benefit. So we have something called mytexasfuture.org, which is our higher education website for all things higher education, for K through 12 students to transfer students to adult learners. And I can promote that information with good faith, knowing that there is an impact that it's having on students' lives. So it's only going to benefit those who are providing those third-party and other credentials to be a part of this organization so that we can have that transparency and get that message out very quickly.
I'll say one other thing, Stacey, which I think you guys are doing it right, is that they're starting relatively slow with some, right? So I think you need to have some kind of first mover advantage, right? Get some stuff, and other people, maybe there's a film by people. Otherwise, no one's going to join. At least, I think it's a real challenge. So doing it slowly and carefully, I think, is right. And then maybe there's some first mover stuff that will ultimately get other folks involved.
And I think be very careful so I'll be very careful with the data in the sense that I should not be making policy changes on a cell size of 5. Right?
Right.
Because sometimes that happens.
Yep.
My gut tells me this, or I heard a personal story, and I'm now going to change this entire policy. That is not what we should be doing. Mm-hmm. It's going to be creating and working with a relationship with CredLens so that we can truly trust the measures that are coming out, so we can change it so that it can benefit students.
Yeah. Yes, good points on both of those. Thank you. All right, final one, and then we'll open up for questions. The brief question here is what happens during the next recession, but I think it's really, we all know that employment cycles change, and therefore, where the power dynamics sit in terms of, I could just go back to requiring a 4-year degree because there's lots of folks need a job right now. And so as we think about economic cycles and we think about motivations and those sorts of things shifting over time, I guess I'm just curious if either of you see big risks or big things to navigate there where the dynamics might cause folks to say, great, I don't have to worry about this anymore. Let's sort of revert away from non-degree credentials and go back to something a little bit more formalized.
Yeah, that's something I worry about. So from my perspective, we have memory problems in America, yep, where if it hasn't happened last week, then it didn't happen, or we forgot it happened. Yep. And so if you take 2020 out, which I totally want to forget that year altogether, like most people, if you take that quarter out that we received, that decline, we haven't had a recession since 2007. That's many, many years, many, many cohorts of students. And so they don't know what it's like to see the data when you hit a recession. The individuals that are most likely to lose their jobs will be those with a high school diploma. And so I think the next, hopefully it will happen in the next 20 years, future state, but that's when we're really going to see whether or not there is resiliency associated with these types of experiences, so that employers are truly vested in that student's background, and they're not going to be the ones that are first losing their jobs.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We might be in a recession soon now, but besides that, so I actually think the work CredLens is doing is somewhat recession-proof, right? In the sense that, listen, if we have a crash and employers are not going to hire, they're going to not hire regardless of CredLens. It's not going to matter. CredLens isn't going to matter, right? Yep. But the work they're doing is going to matter, and I think it's recession-proof. Right? This idea of credential data, validate, all that kind of stuff, is going to be really important, whether we're in the 2020 or we're in 2024, which was a good year, right? And so I don't worry about this because it's so important to do, and I think the impact will be huge regardless of whether we're in a recession or not.
Yeah. And I think doing the right work to embed back to employers, the point
Correct.
that David was making, and sort of making sure that folks are seeing the value at that level, the degree that we can get that sort of embedded in the system, the better outcomes for all sorts of individuals and sort of better outcomes for the ongoing way we think about this work, for sure.
Absolutely. And I also think about AI and how that might be impacting the future work, which it is,
Yep.
and how that plays a role as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. All right, we have about 15 minutes left, so wanted to open up to any questions. Questions in the, to the microphone. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Carolyn Landell. I'm at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm a workforce data newbie, so I'm going to ask a question and you can answer it like you're talking to a fifth grader, because that's about where I am. I was at a session recently. Our workforce commission and workforce boards were sharing some of the challenges they have in collecting these data. Well, does the person who came to their storefront tell them they completed? Does the provider tell them they completed? Does the employer report to somebody that the person they hire? I'm trying to really just understand from a very practical level how your organization is like. I felt like the answer was like, well, there's no place to get this data. So how are you getting it? And what does that offer us, maybe locally, who could help support or do it in our own small way while you're building? And just what can we learn from that to eventually engage in your ecosystem and use it for our aspirations to understand how our things are going in our state and how we can help our students thrive? And David, how do we tap into all this with you?
So how about I take the practical
Sure,
question,
sure.
like how we're operating, and then hand to you to talk about the broader perspective. So you're right to name the challenge. That is a big challenge. We hear that from a lot of folks. The way that we're approaching it is to basically go out to the individual providers and say, hey, let us work with you. So provider by provider, let us work with you, and share your data with us. We're going to share back, share your data with us. We'll sign a data contributor agreement, protect all your data, et cetera. We then can provide outcomes data to you. And so the value proposition to them is, hey, this thing that I currently am, have two of my people just constantly calling people to try to understand, did they complete, what the results were, et cetera. I can now say, hey, for the folks that I know completed my program, great, I'm going to give you that data. I now have a set of outcomes data, and it's a set of outcomes data that is verified in a way that my workforce agency is going to say, yes, thank you, I can accept that. And we are also planning to get to the point where we can say, and by the way, we'll configure it and get it to the workforce agency for you. So our point is, let's be the easy button for all of these training providers and folks who are doing the programs. If we do the easy button well enough, folks are going to want to share the data. That lets us get better data to the workforce commission and sort of build that out over time. So.
Well, and I think something I didn't mention, one of the biggest challenges will be sifting through to understand the treatment effect that takes place.
Yep.
Because we all come back, we all have different experiences within the workforce, educational experiences. Mm-hmm. How do we isolate that in a way to say that this actually had a positive increase in what's happening? Mm-hmm. And as Carolyn knows, we're really trying to be as transparent as we can with all the data that we have. I think there's challenges with FERPA, there's challenges with sharing information,
sure.
But we can do that in a respectful way to get as much information in the hands of policymakers, of program developers, and others to really ultimately change the lives of students, and that's what we're here for.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and I live in North Dakota, where our legislature is currently taking action to move to 90-degree credit bachelor's degrees to try to fix our skilled workforce shortage.
Yeah.
So given the limited data you have on non-degree credentials, how can we still actively promote and sell this to our legislature that's making a decision in 2 weeks?
That is a great question.
Great question.
Neighboring state, I live in Montana, split time between Montana and DC, so appreciate the question. I'm gonna point at David for this one to start to kick us off.
Yeah, it's because HLC and other accrediting bodies are now going forward with this 90 credit hour experience. That's such a tough question. I think that what I'm trying, I'll speak on Texas' behalf. I can't speak on the North, your world. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to create multiple pathways for students that they could see all these doors of opportunity and they can choose those doors. So it's not an either or, it's a yes and. And I think for the 90 credit, I've been wrestling with that lately to think about core curriculum so in Texas we require 42 hours of core curriculum courses. How could that be reduced? How could we revamp that? How could we think through a 3-year program that would be thoughtful and intentional so that we're not watering down the system? And so with that said, we're just trying to create data points to understand what impact it would have for the short-term credential, contact hours versus a certification versus a associate's versus a 4-year versus all the different layers.
Yeah, and I think, so David hit on a bunch of the points that I was thinking about as well. In taking the super optimistic, positive view of this, is all of this is moving the same direction, which is, hey, let's get closer to a wide range of things that are real credentials, real degrees, real credentials that people can use to go get jobs. And so that is one path, but it shouldn't preclude also thinking about where are the credentials that sort of fall short of that 4-year degree that are still real things that give folks the skills they need to go get the job in North Dakota, and how do you make sure that you're showing the value of both of those pushing forward? So hopefully a yes and a little bit is part of the path there.
And one thing, so I've been talking to some developmental psychologists, trying to understand the maturation of a 20-year-old going to the workforce. If they graduate at 17 and then they graduate from college in 3 years at 20, are they ready? Are they ready to take on responsibilities? And so we have to really thoughtfully think through, maybe a 3-year degree could be a great opportunity for an adult learner who had already tried and stopped out, but we have to be careful and really, and like I said, follow the data to see what happens with this and see if there's unintended consequences, because as Americans, we have, with social media and other apps, we have ADHD, all of us now, and we want something immediate. We have to make sure that we allow the time for investment in your educational experience that will lead to thriving.
Yeah, thank you.
Good question.
Appreciate the question.
Hello, Rafael Alvarez with the Greater Houston Partnership.
Great.
Stacy, congratulations on getting Credlens to this stage.
Thank you.
Question for you and question for David. What does your crystal ball say in terms of how long it's going to get to critical mass so that we can all start counting on that data in a holistic way? And David, at the Texas Higher Coordinating Board, what can you do to kind of get that flywheel going with all the community colleges, at least in Texas?
Yeah,
Question.
Good questions.
Good questions.
Good questions. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I'll certainly talk about our sort of goals and how we're approaching this. So, we spent 5 months really just building the platform and making sure that we were ready to go. And then sort of as of December, January, really started turning and say, okay, we're ready. Like, let's start pulling folks in. So we have some pretty aggressive goals for 2025. We want more than 5 million active credentials in the system. We want to get somewhere between 80 and 100 credential issuers in the system. We're focusing on certification bodies first because we think that's what a lot of folks are asking for, and then sort of big push around training providers and some of the credit programs at community colleges. I think that we can start to get to the point where we have some real industry clusters in the next sort of year to 18 months. And I think that if we look out 3 years, we've got enough data to have a real research base, and then there'll be, and then it'll just be a sort of an exercise in filling in and making sure that that we're filling in the data in the other pieces. So that's sort of just to give you a sense of what we have planned.
And so in Texas, we want to be a guinea pig, right? We want to have that relationship with Credlens so that we can start examining what's happening. Because if you zoom out, one metric that really sticks with me, if you look at all the job postings in America right now, 1 out of 11 are based in Texas. So we have to do a better job getting educational experiences that lead to this lively and robust economy in Texas.
Wow.
Hi, my name's Amy. I work for a local education nonprofit, and we are acting as a backbone organization or a convener of K-12, post-secondary, and major industry partners to support more 18 to 24-year-olds to enter into advanced manufacturing careers.
Cool.
And we have great willing participants, a really robust group of folks who are doing this work together. And we've hit kind of this point where everyone's looking at each other and realizing our high schools and our community colleges are pushing out a lot of students or learners with credentials, but those do not align with what is on the JD or what industry partners need to have, because so many of our industry partners have military contracts that are a big part of the jobs that are in our area. So they're kind of just all looking at each other and then looking at us to figure out what to do next. So any advice there?
So in your coalition, do you have some of those sort of employers and what's their ask? Are they asking for the programs to be defined differently?
My sense, I think the thing that's unnamed is industry partners are not willing to ask K-12 or community colleges to change things because they acknowledge there's limited resources and they don't want to push folks out of the conversation. Right. I think on the flip side, K-12 and community colleges understand that they can't necessarily ask industry to change all of their requirements because so many of these things are tied up in very involved contracts. So it feels a little bit like we are just stuck.
Right. Well, I'm super glad that you're doing this work because I think that organizations like yours that pull those groups together, and especially that do it around sort of a specific physical place, I think is, frankly, the best hope we have to start to line those details up and say, hey, we know we need this thing. We can actually, without too much effort, sort of twist our program just a little bit so it more closely aligns with what you're looking for. And so I think having those conversations in an open way and being like, look, we may not be able to commit, but continuing to push people to say, hey, here are all the different elements that sort of lead to this. And then I think, from our perspective, another way would be to sort of think about who is getting those jobs, what were the certifications, and sort of making sure that and is that sort of leading, do those certifications lead to the right sort of results that folks would want in the space? And if so, maybe that's sort of some information to feed back into the higher ed system as well. Yeah, what would you
I think on the student side, what we've tried to do is we create something called Texas OnCourse, and it's an academy for counselors at the middle school, high school, and college levels, so that we have modules to help them explain how to help students navigate the sea of change and information, because I think at the end of the day, students are overwhelmed with all this information. I think that's one area. Another area that we're really trying to hone in on is dual credit. And what I mean by dual credit is, so we have around 250,000 students each year in high school that are taking college courses. And about 10% of them are taking career and technical education courses. That's a missed opportunity where we can really open that up and help align those CTE courses to industry needs that lead to additional credentials so they can get that job out of high school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sheila Bucios. I'm from the University of North Texas. I am curious and I came in late, I rushed, so I apologize if you already talked about this, but accreditation, how does this affect the future of university accreditation?
So I'll start, and then we can. I mean, I think so. Accreditation models, both for the sort of institutional accreditation, and so two different issues. So traditionally, institutions accredited, not programs accredited. However, folks are starting to say, hey, does that mean all of these non-degree credentials sit outside the accreditation? So that you are starting to see accreditation models say, okay, how do we start to evaluate the quality? Do we do it at a programmatic level, or do we do something that we can add in? And there's a few examples of that going on right now. So that to me is pretty exciting.
Where are those examples? Where are those examples?
Yeah, so HLC, great example. They have they have a badging program, and they're looking at exactly the sort of quality metrics around that, doing that in this sort of in a really nice, thoughtful way to pull together what quality looks like. And then they are also planning to include some outcomes metrics, which is another thing that I think we're starting to see because of some of the state regulations that increasingly folks are starting to say, okay, what is the next generation, and can we get some outcomes metrics in for both the sort of full, the institutional accreditation and the programmatic pieces.
And I would probably argue that some of the accrediting bodies haven't caught up to what's happening currently. They were slow to catch up, honestly. I'm just going to be blunt with that.
Yep.
And there's a lot of unknowns. So I don't have an answer for you. I apologize. Should be honest.
Yeah, but it's a good question, and I think there will be a lot of dynamics around this. I think it'll be an interesting space to watch for sure in the next couple of years. Thank you. That was perfectly timed. So question askers, thank you. That was perfect.
Thanks, everyone. Good stuff.
Yeah, we just wanted to close with a thank you for spending the time with us. Hopefully triggered a few thoughts and conversations, and look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.